Welcome to this explainer. Now, we all know the basics of Greek mythology, right? But today, we're not just looking at some static, boring character on an ancient vase. We're going to peel back the layers of the ancient texts to examine the real narrative constructed around Hera, the queen of Olympus. We're talking about a figure completely defined by power, conflict, and some seriously deep-rooted contradictions. Her story is way more complex than you might think.
Okay, let's kick things off with a direct quote from her husband, Zeus, straight out of the Iliad. This perfectly sets up what is basically the ultimate reality TV drama of Mount Olympus. Right away, the ancient texts don't give us this harmonious, peaceful, celestial kingdom. Nope, instead we see a marriage defined by constant, simmering warfare. I mean, Zeus himself literally admits his anger and resentment are constant. And why? Because according to him, her very nature is to oppose him. This quote is our baseline. It tells us right out of the gate that we aren't dealing with a passive queen here, but a highly active, opposing force.
And that leads us to this brilliant contrast, which introduces the core question for this whole explainer. Think about it. How did the divine patron of marriage become history's absolute most famous symbol of marital conflict? As the goddess of marriage and patron of women, you'd totally expect Hera to be the ultimate idealized wife, yet she is the single most feared queen in ancient myth. Her character consistently radiates this atmosphere of anger and unrest. She basically represents an ancient view of femininity, but with all of its supposed flaws amplified to a massive divine scale.
So let's get into Section 1, the Queen of Conflict and Homer's Legacy.
When we look at how her reputation was actually built by ancient writers like Homer, this absolutely fascinating contradiction pops up. Her physical perfection completely clashes with her deeply flawed personality. So on one hand, we have these majestic Homeric epithets, right? She's cow-eyed, which by the way was a massive compliment back then, meaning she had large, beautiful eyes. She's white-armed and of the golden throne. Sounds great. But then, on the other hand, her actual characterization in the stories is just relentless. She's described as nagging, jealous, irritable, and stubborn. And instead of acting out in the open, she relies on these secret plots and intrigues. The texts portray her love and hatred as totally irrational, and she literally never hesitates to misuse her authority.
Moving on to Section 2, Swallowed at Birth, the Origin Story.
To really understand her intense need for control and, let's be honest, chaotic behavior, we have to rewind to an incredibly turbulent childhood. Hera is the daughter of Cronus and Rhea, and her very first experience in life was being swallowed whole by her own father right at birth. Not exactly a great start. After eventually getting released, she didn't just get a normal upbringing either. During the Great Cosmic War, the Titanomachy, her mom sent her to the very edge of the world to be raised by Oceanus and Tethys. I mean, it's pretty hard to be well-adjusted when your early childhood milestones involve being eaten and then exiled to the edge of the universe. But eventually, after Zeus establishes his rule, she becomes his ultimate and, according to Hesiod, final wife.
Which brings us to Section 3, a divine and very toxic marriage.
Now, we hit this central conflict of her entire character, her union with the king of the gods. You see, this relationship wasn't just a regular marriage. It was a hieroskamos, a foundational, sacred institution. Even though she and Zeus were actually together before getting married, their wedding was eventually celebrated with a massive, formal ceremony. This concept of the sacred marriage was a huge recurring motif in both myth and real-world ancient cult practices, and it's almost always depicted ideally. According to one tradition, this ultimate wedding took place in the spectacular Garden of the Hesperides, where Gaia herself gifted Hera golden apples. Honestly, it sounds like the perfect fairy tale, right?
Well, not quite. When we contrast that mythical ideal with the grim reality, we uncover a deeply, deeply toxic power dynamic. Sure, there are moments of romantic ideals, like nature responding to their union with fragrant beds of flowers or golden clouds popping up to hide them from the other gods. But the reality behind closed doors, it's shocking. When Zeus caught her plotting, or when she went just a bit too far, like that time she severely harmed his son Heracles, Zeus harshly rebuked her, and I mean harshly. He actually punished her by literally hanging her in chains in the sky. No way around it, the toxicity was so bad that even their son Ares inherited their flawed, combative character. And Hephaestus, who once tried to defend his mom from Zeus, couldn't forget the suffering she caused him either.
But you have to hand it to her. Hera's strategic brilliance truly shines during the Trojan War. She didn't just fight with brute force, she fought with cunning deception. To turn the tide of the war in favor of the Achaeans, she executed an absolute masterclass in manipulation. Step 1, she gets all dolled up and borrows a magical girdle from Aphrodite. Step 2, she literally calls upon the god's sleep to help her awaken desire in her husband. And finally, on Mount Ida, she completely overwhelms Zeus with passion. She even plays innocent, claiming she's just on her way to reconcile her old foster parents, Oceanus and Tethys. And you know what? It works flawlessly. Zeus is so distracted, covering them in a golden cloud, that Hera is able to manipulate the entire cosmic chessboard right behind his back.
That leads into Section 4, the goddess of wrath and her catalog of retribution. Having established this toxic dynamic, we can really see how her repressed power manifested into legendary vengeance across the mortal world. Her sheer influence was entirely polarized. You were either a victim or an ally. There was no in-between. On the victim side, we have Heracles, the ultimate target of her wrath, who she subjected to countless, agonizing trials simply because he was Zeus's son with another woman. She also harbored endless hatred for Paris and all of Troy, simply because Paris didn't pick her in a beauty contest. But look at her allies. She supported Achilles, and despite being jealous of his mother Thetis, she helped him because she had actually raised Thetis herself. She granted immortality to Menelaus, and she guided the Argonauts through incredibly dangerous passages. Her interventions literally shaped the hero's journey in Greek myth.
100. That is the staggering number of eyes on Argus, the terrifying, all-seeing watchman Hera appointed simply to guard over one of Zeus's affairs, a woman named Io. Just imagine the sheer level of vigilance and jealousy required to employ a 100-eyed monster just to keep tabs on your husband's indiscretions. It's wild, but it perfectly encapsulates the extremes Hera would go to in order to maintain her grip on her domain.
And finally, Section 5, Symbols of the Queen, a Lasting Legacy.
As we start to wrap this explainer up, we can see how the ancients immortalized her through these powerful symbols that we still recognize today. And these symbols really cement her status not just as a jealous wife, but as an omnipresent queen deeply tied to the cycles of life. The peacock is probably her most famous symbol. Those beautiful eye-shaped feathers are said to directly represent the 100 eyes of her loyal watchman, Argus, placed there by Hera after his death. Her sacred fruit is the pomegranate, which is often associated with fertility and marriage, right alongside her sacred flower, the lily. Furthermore, she's constantly associated with childbirth, often mentioned alongside her daughter, Eileithyia, and of course her immense legacy carried right over into Roman mythology where she was identified and revered as Juno.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. We've seen the Homeric epithets, the incredibly toxic marriage, the cunning deceptions, and the relentless wrath. But when history, even mythological history, is written by ancient men who largely viewed female agency as inherently flawed, we have to ask ourselves how much of female power is simply rebranded as villainy. Was Hera truly the nagging, irrational antagonist of Olympus? Or was she simply a fierce queen, fiercely defending her sacred institution against a notoriously chaotic and unfaithful king? Think about that the next time you hear a story about the Queen of the Gods.